a podcast by VisionPoint Marketing. How do you define strategy? I think if you ask three different people, kind of three different answers of what strategy is. I have my own definition that I like that I actually cribbed from Harvard Business School. But would really love to hear kind of your approach. What is strategy?
It's funny that you start with that because I remember you asked me that question in my interview with you.
Welcome to Rock and Roll, a podcast on strategic marketing and enrollment management in higher education. You'll learn enrollment marketing and management tips from higher ed experts and marketing insiders so that you can boost your institution's enrollment. I'm Dana Cruikshank, Vice President of Market Strategy here at VisionPoint Marketing. On today's episode, you'll hear from Diane Sutton, founder and chairman of VisionPoint, along with Erica Kim, our Director of Strategy, as we discuss what is strategy and why is it so important to enrollment marketing.
I can hop in here.
Oh, please do.
I think the best way to think about strategy is that it is the overarching direction that you need when you're making lots of smaller tactical decisions that help you direct where you should invest and very specifically also tell you where you should not invest.
I agree with Diane. There's definitely this overarching component, the sense of direction, purpose, I would say, behind that. I think that strategy ultimately answers, if you're also thinking about it conceptually, answers a lot of core questions when you're trying to make those decisions, to Diane's point. So the who, the what, the where, when, and how. I think that especially when, in marketing, higher ed marketing, when there are dollars involved and budgets, or you're trying to reach specific goals within a certain time constraint, I think you just don't want anything to be arbitrary or up to assumption or guessing. And if there are ever areas where that's an unknown, you make certain decisions and then you make sure to benchmark it or measure it to optimize. So I think that's definitely a core part of the work.
I really love what you're saying about just making decisions, because I kind of see strategy in a very related way of thinking about a whole bunch of people are going to be involved. Once you've identified your goals, once you've figured out what it is you're trying to achieve, there's going to be a whole bunch of people involved who were not in that room when a strategy production process was happening or strategy development process was happening. So those folks are going to have to make key decisions that will directly impact whether or not those goals get met or success is achieved and so forth. So to me as well, Erica, just kind of like you said, it really comes down to, are you laying down the groundwork for everyone to make those right decisions throughout that pursuit of those goals, to where even if somebody didn't have that full picture, didn't have the luxury of being in that strategy development process, do they have enough material to work on, if you will, to work with to be able to make those right decisions moving forward? Because I think these things kind of live or die at the tertiary level of execution, if you will. It's not the senior leadership. It's not the managers who are consulted or lower level leaders who are consulted. It really is that person who's on the ground. Maybe it's an admissions counselor. Maybe it's a department secretary. Maybe it's a faculty member who's having a conversation with a prospective student. If a sound strategy is in place, everybody kind of understands what that game plan is. Hopefully they're making those right decisions. I've got to be honest with you. So I worked in higher ed for a number of years on the institution side, and then actually in government before then. And there were a lot of strategy processes that would happen across different functions. And my immediate association with higher ed strategy is a binder, right? My mind just goes to a 2-inch thick 3-ring binder that contains the strategy that was created, and it sits up on a conference room shelf, and everyone says, "Oh, great, we created that strategy," and that's it. It never gets executed. Never gets done. I know in the brain trust that we have here today, we have a lot of experience here. So in higher education. So, just kind of talk me through, why do you feel why is that? Why is it that institutions invest so much in strategy just to end up leaving it alone or never really following it?
Yeah, Dana, I'm not so sure that it's a good thing that higher ed does a lot of strategy in that way. I think that it's understandable as to why maybe it's evolved to the big binder on the shelf. And I think it's probably because higher ed, they try to bring in a lot of different insights and perspectives from lots of different people across the campus, as well as outside stakeholders to drive what their strategy should be. And also, they're many times not making as many of the decisions about where you should not invest, so everybody gets included. And what that does is that makes it a bigger binder. It's like you have to mention everything, because if you leave anything out, then someone would be upset about that, or it would feel like they're not listening to that particular stakeholder. And I think the key is kind of the flip side of you, because you can invest into everything. And we never have been able to, but I think especially in today's world of higher ed, you really cannot invest into everything. So you have to make decisions as to what are the things you're going to do that will get you to the goal, that are going to bring you the best ROI, and they're going to be able to achieve your short-term as well as your long-term goals. And I think the secret to doing that strategy well is being able to focus down and not include everything.
That makes perfect sense. So if I understand what you're saying, a lot of this, it sounds like the refining fire of a good strategy, if you will, is the power of no, of being able to say, we can't do that. In your experience, what does that look like? How do we guide those folks who are really passionate, or frankly, a lot of times I think afraid that their unit, their department, their perspectives, their career is going to be kind of pushed to the wayside if they're not able to fight for their piece of the pie in a strategic planning process? What does that process look like to be able to come to some level of agreement of, no, this is what we're saying no to?
I think so much of it starts with leadership, and that the leader needs to be able to paint a vision for what the full institution's goals are and where they stand in the marketplace, and how they're going to achieve that. And then all the stakeholders need to be on the same page. Then you're doing less of protecting your own turf, and you're more focused on what the full institution's goals and how you're going to get there. So it's really more about the vision. That's a lot to achieve for any leader. That's a big task in many institutions, that have thousands of employees, and they've been around for hundreds of years. It's hard to do that, but I think that's where that comes from.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, and actually that comes to me. It's interesting because I know higher education tends to be pretty consensus driven, just as a culture. And of course, I've always found that, kind of one of the problems with consensus, if you will, is that, well, there's a few problems with consensus, but to me, one of the issues can be consensus can mean everybody gets a veto in what is said. And ultimately for myself, and this may be, I'm sure some folks may disagree with this, but Diane, what you just said about leadership, ultimately, I think in a strategic process, there needs to be someone who gets to make that final call. And I think that's what the appeal of bringing in an outside party consultant or an agency or so forth can be, is that you can have somebody who, doesn't have those internal relationships, those internal investments to be able to say, like, okay, here are those tough decisions to make.
And also say, Dana, that I'm thinking about what you just mentioned and what Diane shared. I think that higher ed is just really unique. And I'm sure every sector, every type of institution would say, oh, we're also unique. And that's very true. Everyone has their own set of constraints or characteristics that influence a culture or way of operating. But I think often about the ones that higher ed has, just because those are our partners, those are the folks that we work with. But I think of that model very much of shared governance. It's not like a company where you have your exec leadership and your CEO and folks making a decision there. You have your president and then you have faculty. And that model of shared governance is very unique. And there are reasons just in the history baked into the history of higher ed of why faculty have a large voice and a lot of voting power, if you will. I think that explains a lot of the process that we see, or the pace of process even that we see, and the reasons that a lot of academic units need to have a voice. And I want us to keep that in mind, because I don't think it's common in a lot of other fields, and it does manifest in some of the work. The other thing I would say is that not only are institutions so large and serve so many different types of people, but they're also unique in that it's like a town in which you have a mayor and sports arenas and entertainment and housing and security and like various other establishments. It's not so much like a business. It is a business in that there is a business model behind it, but there are more elements, I think, that folks aren't accustomed to thinking through that do influence strategic vision. And there's so many more considerations because it operates like a living, breathing town.
I love that, honestly. And not just because I've been recently going back through my Richard Scarry books of, the little town with the little fuzzy brown bears that inhabit the town. So I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I love that thought of higher ed as a town, as a community, because I think corporate strategy, for example, is really straightforward, is much more straightforward than higher education strategy is, even for a complex company or institution that's out there. And military strategy, which is actually where I first learned really how to hone strategy, working for the US Army, is also actually pretty straightforward because the objectives tend to be pretty clear. You're making money, you're grabbing this piece of land, you're doing and so forth. Eric, I think what you just raised is really, I think that really kind of hits it on the head here that, on the one hand, we're developing strategies to help, say, boost enrollment or increase fundraising, whatever that kind of immediate objective and need is. But a true strategy in higher ed is also going to have to foster that sense of community, strengthen the bonds within the institution, really help people understand, really in many ways, help define the relationship that people have with their institution, which is different than a relationship they're going to have with the manufacturer of their car or whoever, manages their 401k and so forth. So I hadn't really thought about that till you mentioned that, but that
especially students, right? So when I think back to grad school, there's this one quote from a faculty member that always sticks with me. And she said that higher ed can be unique in that the consumer is in some ways also the product, in that you have students, you're often your target audience, not our only one. We have many other target audiences in enrollment marketing, especially, and for higher ed, that's often a target audience. And oftentimes they come to your institution and then they hopefully become alums. Oftentimes very loyal or dedicated alums, and they feel like they have a vested interest. And oftentimes they do. Alums are definitely an important stakeholder group, but it makes it more complex when you're trying to make decisions as an institution because you have this additional group whose journey and relationship with you started at a certain point, especially if you're thinking in marketing. They are marketing to you. There's something that this audience found in your brand and your messaging and your culture, what you offered, whatever it may be that resonated with them. But that reason can be so different from one student to the next student. And then the relationships branch outward. It's very complicated. But I always find that so fascinating because I think that there are a few sectors where the consumer is also in some ways what I don't love saying product because it can sound so
no, it's like Pink Floyd's The Wall or something like that happening. Of like, yeah. But no, I hear you. Yeah.
Where the relationship doesn't just become like, hey, we're going to market to this consumer soft drink, and then they're going to become an advocate of this soft drink company. Like that happens for sure. But I think it's different, that relationship with what you ended up experiencing over 4 years, sometimes many more years for other types of programs, even if it's a semester, that is a pretty substantial amount of time and experience to have with an institution or community. I think it's that folks come in as students, often graduate, and you become ambassadors, if you will, to your alma mater. And I don't think there are too many types of life experiences at such a formative age, if you're thinking traditional undergraduate institutions, which is not the only type of institution we work with, but when we're thinking about that traditional four-year residential college experience, I don't think there's anything that quite compares to what one experiences over that span of time at that age, coming into more independence, or maybe for folks coming into their own, where they're exploring intellectually, socially, culturally. And I think that's why a lot of folks many years later still go to their reunions for their institutions or care about where, talk about where they went to college and have a lot of fun memories there. I think that the emotional level of connection runs really deep, and you become, maybe product wasn't the best word, but living, breathing, walking humans around the earth who then are ambassadors or advocates for that institution and are essentially what that institution said, hey, you're going to come here, you're going to get great experience, academics, faculty who care about you, and then you experience that and it becomes part of you. I would say there's a shaping of the self that I think is quite different.
Yesterday, I was talking to an associate vice provost of a pretty significant university, and she shared with me that one of the things that she has found refreshing in the way that VisionPoint works, and this is in building strategy and understanding what the scope is that we are actually building strategy very specific for that scope of work, of what their goals are, and understanding what their goals and their challenges, their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, all of that, taking that all into consideration and actually creating a custom solution. And she said that another large agency that she works with, what they essentially do is they have a list of things that this is what they're going to do. And then when they're pitching or talking to them, they are basically trying to convince them why they should take A, B, or C. And she said it's a very different approach. And because what each institution needs or each program needs is to be able to have somebody truly understand what their strategy should be, because it can't be the same thing that is being applied to everybody else. And I thought that was really helpful and interesting. She's a very innovative academic leader. And the reason that she's in the position that she's in is because she likes to look at things differently and actually do them differently, because she's been able to get outsized results by taking that sort of approach.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that some more, because I feel like that's a mistake a lot of strategists make, of trying to figure out, okay, here are current trends, here are current realities in the market space, and here are some insights that I have learned. So let me just go ahead and try to apply that to everyone's situation. You know, Mark Twain famously said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you start thinking every problem is a nail. It sounds like what you're describing is that sort of, hey, sometimes we need to just take that different approach. Appreciate you going free form, Mommy. It just tends to be a good way to just kind of warm up into it. So awesome. Thanks guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.